Howdy, folks, and welcome to Fireside Friday, the show where we take a deep dive on a single song and see what we can learn from it. My name's Cary Nightingale, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Kevin Niebrick. Let's light this match. In today's episode, we'll be diving deep into 1997's Selfless, Cold, and Composed by Ben Folds 5. The studio version features drums, bass, piano, and a string arrangement. Kevin, which one of us is selfless, and which one is cold and composed?
Well, I don't think either of us could be considered selfless, but you're definitely the cold one. Also, if anyone asks, I'm the good, you're the bad and the ugly.
Nice.
Lyrically, Selfless, Cold, and Composed is a breakup song written from the perspective of one half of a defunct duo. We learn quickly that our narrator is passionate, hurt, and very possibly in the wrong in this situation. In hindsight, it is probably for the best that these two kids decided to part ways. This song narrows its focus on that moment, both short-lived and also painfully long, when one person has decided to leave, and there's nothing the other person can do to change that. Our rhyme scheme is loose, avoiding a persistent use of perfect rhymes, much like the song Volcano that we listened to last week. I really like that Ben doesn't describe precisely what was said, just saying that it was what you wanted to hear and what he wanted to say. Together, these lines are rhythmically pleasing, and left conveniently from that description is whether or not what was said was at all honest. We are given very little external detail. Save for the loose imagery of breaking dishes in the midst of a tantrum, any mention of our surroundings is avoided altogether. But the narrator in this song is relatively direct in speaking his mind. He has accepted the fact that his ex is leaving and would gladly settle for an emotional reaction of any kind, preferring for their relationship to go up in flames rather than to simply fizzle out. The subject of this song calmly weathers the final moments of our narrator's emotional storm by remaining selfless, cold, and composed. My favorite line in this song is the line, "Just one sign that could show me that you give a shit." It's very pointed. Cary, do you have a line that you really appreciate in this song?
Well, I'm actually partial to the opening line that you mentioned. I said what you wanted to hear and what I wanted to say, because it's a great introduction to the narrator's frame of mind in the aftermath of his breakup. I don't identify with the narrator because I'm more of the heartless bastard type. So let's talk composition. There are a number of interesting things about the overall sound of Selfless, Cold, and Composed, and some of its component parts. There's a really jazzy vibe to the piece, which makes sense given the piano at front and center, the walking bass lines, and the emphasis by the drummer on the snare and swinging ride cymbal. It's a fairly complex structure, though, as different sections feature different playing styles and composed parts. It's important to mix things up like this. Varying drum patterns, chord progressions, bass lines, having the string section come and go. Those are all things that can keep the listener's interest over the course of a 6+ minute song. Pop audiences are less and less likely to demand or even tolerate non-lyrical interludes, so keeping things fresh is really the name of the game. There were a few things that really stood out about the rhythm and harmony. Selfless, Cold, and Composed is played at a rapid 182 beats per minute, at least where I counted it in the verse, and it doesn't seem to be set to a click track, so that can shift the tempo. The high tempo like that gives a lot of energy, and it helps to showcase the anxiousness of the narrator. It's also not in a standard 4/4 time signature, but rather in 3, or probably more accurately described as 6/8, because the most common duration of a chord in this track is 6 beats. The drummer mixes in a lot of really effective fills and is obviously setting a strong foundation and playing way above my skill level. I peeked at the sheet music, and saw that it's written in F sharp minor, yet the main home chord is an F sharp major. I'd never really seen this before, but then again, I also don't analyze a lot of sheet music. But I think it makes sense. Maybe I'm giving credit for something unintentional, but it seems like the writer is saying, we've just broken up. I'm keeping all my dishes, my decor, my friends, everything else that I'm used to. But since I can't stay at home, I'll be crashing in the next door neighbor's attic for about the next 6 minutes. It really is strange because all the chords used in this song would fit into F sharp minor, the Aeolian mode, except for that home chord. Usually, moving to the home chord, the one or the tonic, as it's called in music theory jargon, gives a sense of resolution. Of course, that depends on where it's coming from to get to home. Now, harmonizing the song in this way sounds like it maybe weakens the resolutions a little bit or adds a little bit of extra tension. Now, that's exactly the sort of thing you'd do if you were a music nerd writing about a conflict of differing emotional responses, which is really not a conflict at all because one of those emotional responses is no response, and the other one is lashing out at it. But Kev, I think we should have a fireside chat about the subjective appeal of this song. But that'll have to wait. It's time for a short break. This one's brought to you by
Aunt Mary Jane's all-purpose flour. Whether you're baking something special for that special someone, or you just so happen to be especially baked, Aunt Mary Jane has the flour for any occasion. Thanks, Aunt Mary Jane. We'll be right back.
Howdy, folks, and welcome back. As promised, it's time for a little fireside chat. First off, Kev, why does this song exist?
Well, breakups can be messy and difficult. This song feels like it was written to get past a difficult emotional experience.
Okay, Kev, how well would you say Ben Folds communicated his message and appealed to his audience's emotion?
I think the lyrics clearly portray at least one half of the story, save for a few mentions from the narrator who either quotes the subject of this piece or describes their actions. We have very little information about their feelings and thoughts on the matter, which in this case makes perfect sense. The emotional appeal for me is very high. The instrumentation is rich, beautiful, and remarkably happy and triumphant given the subject matter. From start to finish in this song, I feel as if the narrator progresses from anger to resignation, briefly stopping along the way on regret. But that's the narrator. What about the author? If we assume that this is autobiographical, then Ben Folds suffered through a terrible breakup, didn't handle it particularly well, and then wrote this song about it. The very act of writing out this scenario, even with embellishments or half truths, can be cathartic. It's a way of exploring your true emotions and letting them come to the surface.
Well, Kev, I think I can agree about the narrator's journey within the context of the song. And it is important to understand the function of catharsis as part of the songwriting process. For the uninitiated among us, catharsis is relief from repressed emotions. So in this song, our narrator very clearly had expressive rage all the way back in the first verse when he was calling for those dishes to be broken. Now, that's not an emotion that was repressed, and I'm no psychiatrist, but I don't think rage suppresses other emotions either. But I will grant that it could be a release at the end of some sort. But that's the narrator, just a character. He doesn't need catharsis because this is just a story. When it comes to intended messages, though, I'm more concerned with the listener than the author. I think the intended message was more about acceptance and moving on. At least that's what I got out of it. Sometimes two personalities are at opposing ends of the spectrum, and sure, there's going to be that initial attraction or magnetism, but it's just not enough for a lasting relationship. I think the musical composition of this song bears this out. There's only a few parts with significant tension, like on the suspended chords, the bombast at the beginning of the bridge sections, and a couple of points in the melody when it's clear that the narrator is unhappy. Without significant tension, the resolution that we get at the end is pretty subtle, but not at all unhappy. That should point a little closer to acceptance than resignation in my book. So, all that to say, it's fairly emotional without crying on my shoulder, which is nice. Kev, what did you think of the repeat listenability value?
Repeat listenability for me is very high. This is absolutely one of my favorite songs. I think it does an excellent job of telling a story. It challenges the listener to empathize with a flawed narrator, and it just sounds beautiful.
Well, I can agree with you that Selfless, Cold, and Composed sounds beautiful for the first few listens. But once it sinks in that that character is flawed in a very specific way, it's easy to alienate listeners like me who are deeply flawed, but in a way that's more akin to the non narrating side of this breakup. I listened to this song about a dozen times as I was shaping my analysis, and I gotta tell you, there was a very distinct curve in which my interest peaked around listen 5 or 6, and it quickly waned after that. Maybe because they used a string section instead of a saxophone. But it doesn't have that durable appeal for me. I still do appreciate a lot of the compositional and production elements, and I would say I've learned something from it. But Kev, this was your selection, so tell me, how did you score it?
Ultimately, I rated Selfless, Cold, and Composed by Ben Folds at an 8.5 out of 10 on the TuneScore scale.
As always, we invite and encourage you, our dear audience, to give a listen to the track we discussed today. It's on our TuneScored Tracks playlist on our YouTube channel.
While you're there, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and leave us a comment, letting us know what you thought of our score and critique. If you're an up-and-coming songwriter, that's also a great place to recommend one of your songs for a TuneScore and some good old-fashioned, honest feedback. We'd love to hear from you.
We've had a lot of fun today, and we hope you did too. That's been Kevin Niebrick. I've been Cary Nightingale. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay sound.
And rather than actually destroying your shared dishware, it's probably safer just to write a song about it.
Well, I think you've definitely got a point there. Broken glass is the silent killer of every home.